So, looking at the artist Yellena James, who does beautiful drawings of coral and the ocean, we are going to create a piece inspired by her work. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at some images of coral and seaweed, and I'm going to look at some of the images that Yellena James draws and paints, and I'm going to copy some of her shapes, some of the imagery. So remember to draw nice and lightly, because we want to be able to see only watercolour. We don't want to be able to see the pencil marks coming through. So just roughly sketch out your design. So now that I have drawn out my design and I have my basic pattern, I might just want to go in with a rubber and rub out any of the really dark lines. So some of these are quite heavy, so I'm just going to remove them slightly so I can still see them, but for the purpose of the video you probably won't really be able to see what I've drawn. And this just means that if I'm going to paint with like some light colours, a light wash, perhaps a nice yellow, I'm really not going to see these pencil marks coming through. Now I've got some tissue because I find it really useful just to dab my excess paint and water off in here. So I'm going to start off with lots of water. The key to watercolours is water. So remember, lots and lots of water. I'm going to mix some different colours to start with. So I want a kind of greeny background. So I'm going to experiment with a few different greens. Okay. And then place onto your paper using lots of water so that colour can really move about and bleed into each other. So you could put the water on first and then put your colour in and watch it move about and bleed on the paper, so wet on wet. Bit of a heavier colour and just put some water on the top and watch it all bleed through. You could do this with any size brush. I find this kind of size much better. It's a medium sized brush. I've got a bit more control where it's not quite so big, but at the same time it's not so small that it's going to take me ages. It's important to get a good sized brush because you don't want the water to dry out. So you do have to work quite quickly on this because you can already see, look, that's drying there. I've got some shapes, but use them. This work is all about shapes. Okay, so now I've got the majority of the background done. It's really important now to go into these shapes. So they are going to blend into the background. I'm going to do very similar colours, but I might just want to do something a little bit more distinct. So perhaps maybe a bit of a darker green or a different shade of blue. So I'm just going to go in with more of a teal kind of colour. So you can see that it's still very, very much linked to the colours that I already have, but it's slightly different, so it's going to stand out just a little bit because this is my coral. Now if you want to get a nice range of colours, all you actually need is your primary colours. So your blue, your yellow and your red, and with those three colours you can mix any colour that you like. Obviously you can't add white and black to that to get lighter or darker shades or tints, but you can create a really wide range of different hues with those colours. You can see there how that yellow is kind of creeping in. I really like that movement, that blending. Kind of helps to show like the movement of the waves of the ocean. So just really experiment. There's no right or wrong with this. You notice I'm not being too perfect with it, just kind of letting the watercolours take shape themselves. Go in with a little bit of red, something nice that's going to just stand out a bit more. Just mute it a little bit with some greens there to bring it a bit more browny, earthy kind of colours. You can see that lovely bleeding. It's got a really beautiful effect, I think. Really gorgeous. Okay, so the last thing now is just to fill in any space. So you can see here, I've got a little bit of space. Just going to fill it in. Here I did paint, but it's now gone a bit faded. The colour's dried quite light, so I'm just going to go in. Okay, so here is our really simple background wash, and we are going to bring it to life now with pen and colouring pencils. Okay, so now we have our background. I've just taped mine down a little bit with a bit of masking tape to help hold it in one place, especially where the paper bends, but you don't have to do that. I've just done it purposely for the video to make it easier. So we're going to go into it first of all with pens. Now you can do any kind of pen that you like. If you've got fine liners, these are really lovely to play around with, but you might not have them. I'm going to simply do the majority of the work in a biro pen, a normal writing pen. I've got them in green and blue as well, which I thought might go nice with this work. And I do have a Pro marker, a thicker pen, so perhaps you've got like a board pen or something, a marker that you could use. And finally I've got this green one as well, which is another different thickness. So just to play around with different size marks really, and there is no right and wrong, so just play around with it, test them on a bit of paper first, see if you like them. So I'm going to go in first of all with my pen. Now this is where you basically get to doodle across your work. So I would like to work down here to start with. So I'm going to work on this piece of coral, and I'm going to outline my coral first of all in pen. I'm going to do this quite sketchily, making sure I've got a lot of movement in my arm, a lot of space to get around those bends, those corners, because this work is full of lovely curves, lovely bends and corners, and I want them to be really neat. So make sure you're constantly moving your hand and your arm to get the best drawing position possible. Don't limit yourself in your movement. Make sure that you've got a free space to move around. And really you can just experiment with all different types of doodling, with different drawing, with different marks, anything that you like. So I've drawn that in. Now I want to do some of these lovely sort of leaves. Okay, so now I'm going to have a go at maybe drawing with some blue. So I'm going to draw around this shape here. And literally exactly the same. I'm going to draw the outline, but this time I'm kind of going to go where the watercolours have told me to go. So I'm looking at the shapes that they have created. And although I did purposely paint here, and I purposely created this shape, where the bleeding has happened, where the colours have merged, I want to keep that because it's really beautiful and it speaks about how there's movement, it speaks about the ocean moving. So I'm going to centre, copying her shapes that Yellena James does in her work, and I'm going to colour this one in. So now I'm just going to go around the edge again, change some of those thicknesses of it. And because that one's thick, I don't want these lines to be quite as thick, so I'm going to go into them with my little green pen instead. I'm now going to go into this with some colouring pencils. So again, there's no right and wrong, but I just think that the pencils add a really nice little touch of colour, bit of softness to the work, and they're not quite as harsh as the pens. And literally just do exactly the same as what I was doing with pens, but with pencil, just to change up the media, to give it a little bit more texture, different textures in there, different colours. And if you don't have pens or you don't have pencils, you don't have to use either, and you can use anything that you would like on this piece of work. So it's fine to overlap, that's great, doesn't matter at all. Pencils I find go really nicely with the watercolour actually, they kind of complement each other, so it's quite subtle, they work very well together. Might be that I just want to fill in some of that space, so go over some of those watercolours with a little bit of another colour over the top, so just bringing in some yellow there, creating some different tones. When I'm colouring large sections with pencil, I kind of do it on a slight slant, and I try and colour in a circular or an oval motion. This just helps get a really smooth blend, and you can't see the direction that I've shaded in, so it helps to give you a block of colour rather than directional marks. So now it's really important to build up your imagery. Use the whole space and overlap, because that is what is going to bring the work together. So I need to be overlapping parts, so where I've crossed over here, and filling the space with different shapes, different textures and different types of mark making. So circles are really good, directional lines are great, dots and dashes. Experiment, put whatever you like into your work. And there we have it, a piece inspired by Yellena James, using a watercolour background and a mixed media method to draw on top, using her shapes and her designs of coral to inspire our multi-layered mixed media piece of artwork.